scrapped ideas, unreleased troops that we were never meant to see, and early concepts of existing troops that you won't even recognize. Today, we're taking a look at every troop that Clash of Clans killed, even some that did technically make it, but were a completely different troop when they started out. Starting with the Rocketeer. In March of 2016, the upcoming update was leaked, and inside the game files, players found a new Dark Elixir troop called the Rocketeer. This was a skeleton similar to the ones in Balloons that had a rocket strapped to its back. It's unknown what exactly it did, but some people did manage to recompile the assets and got this. Yeah. Why does it move like that though? I don't think its animations were quite ready yet, and it's unknown what it did to deal damage, but out of all the troops in this video, this one came the closest to being added. Its design was found with 2 levels, which would have been for Tunnel 10 and 11, the highest at the time. Its in-game icon was done, there was a Dark Elixir barracks design for it. It almost seemed like it was ready to go, it's gonna get added tomorrow. However, it didn't. And instead, the bowler was added in its place, and the Dark Elixir barracks was changed. Many players like to speculate that this eventually inspired the Dragon Rider 5 years later, and I can see why, but aside from the skeleton model, they didn't seem similar at all. Bruno Arms van der Vansen. Yeah, quite the long name there. I'm almost positive it would have been shortened. This was a giant type of troop that SuperCell revealed in the Art of SuperCell book a while back. It seemed like the intent was for him to pull this wagon around full of bombs and throw them. He was like a bomb tower that walked. And according to the small text here, his weakness was this box of very volatile bombs, and that he should keep moving around. I'm not really sure what that means, but I assume when he wasn't moving, maybe something could target his bomb box and explode, and he would deal a lot of damage, kind of like a giant skeleton. Maybe this inspired the giant skeleton, who knows? It also said he cannot wear armor because it would reduce his arm movement. There are many giants in the Clash universe, but this one never made it in. Lumberjack. We don't actually know what this troop was called, but I call it Lumberjack because we know it was a troop similar to a Lumberjack from Clash Royale, and its mechanics were pretty identical. So it was a troop that dropped a rage spell, eventually at least, probably when it died. And these were its stats. I've created this info page based on what was found to give you a better idea of what this troop was capable of. As you can see, it was fast, it hit as hard as a P.E.K.K.A in terms of DPS, but it was squishy, it didn't have a lot of HP, it was comparable to a miner. The real value came with its rage spell that it dropped, and interestingly, the troop was playtested with many different spells, not just the rage. One of them was the heal spell. It's pretty clear they liked the idea of a troop that could drop spells. However, developers said that the troop didn't feel as a endgame troop. At the time, this was Town Hall 12 being developed. And eventually, after many troops, they decided on a dragon that did chain damage, the Electro Dragon. But SuperCell loves to revisit scrapped ideas, so it's very possible that years down the line, this would inspire the Super Valkyrie. Barbarian Charior. Also known as the Viking Chariot, there is not much statistical info about it, but we know that it looked like this, and it was supposed to be a chariot flying air unit that shot Tesla bolts from the clouds as it flew by. So it would have possibly been similar to a Dragon Rider maybe, a troop riding a flying machine type thing. Here's another picture of the same concept. The cloud is gone and it looks more like a chariot, and the barbarian was turned into a Viking dude with a lightning staff or whatever that is. He would have been riding that chariot, shooting bolts from the sky, and that's basically what the troop was. It's unclear what it targeted or if it had any interesting mechanics like a chain lightning or something, but it did look sweet though, and it's certainly one of the more polished concepts in this video. Elixir Goblin. This was a troop that was being worked on in 2019, and it was this purple looking monster, probably in the giant or troll family, and it wielded a hammer that was filled with elixir. Developers never gave any context to what it did, but most likely the hammer, which sort of looks like glass, eventually broke and released elixir that dealt damage to any buildings it spilled on. Later on, that concept developed into this, a giant goblin that had a chained ball ball of Elixir spirits, and this one we do know what it did. It would release some of those Elixir spirits every time it hit something with that chain ball, and they do some kind of damage. We don't know what they did at the time, but yeah. Eventually, these concepts did end up inspiring the making of the Yeti, but according to developers, these early concepts were very different from what ended up in the game. So I wanted to include it anyway. It's basically a different troop. Giant Minion. It was basically what it sounds like, a giant minion. Developers explained that the idea behind it was, what if there was a minion that was so big it couldn't get off the ground? So most likely this giant was a ground minion. Now, while no pictures of that exist, we do have this, which was when the Clash Royale team was working on a different giant minion of their own. If it looks familiar, yes, that was also one of the early concepts of the Yeti and served as an inspiration for the Super Minion. However, it's important to note that Ano, the game lead at the time, said that these two giant minion concepts were not the same. So while Clash Royale's giant minion inspired many other troops, the other fat minion who couldn't get off the ground had never made it past concept stages. Resurrection Spell. This was supposed to be a spell released in 2018. Basically, it was a spell where it would drop a ring where you placed it, and any troop that died in its radius would come back to life for a few seconds. It sounds very much like the revive spell, but keep in mind, this was not for heroes, it was for troops. But the fact that the revive spell can revive heroes is pretty funny because the resurrection spell was scrapped because, you won't believe this, it was too OP. Wait till 2018 players play Modern Clash. Anyway, the resurrection spell seems to have just been ahead of its time. Giant Hero. So there are many old concepts of heroes and how they originally looked. It's pretty fascinating to see the different iterations. Even some that are totally unrecognizable, like these wizards, are probably just very old concepts of the Grand Warden. I mean, you can see his book in one of them. But then there's a giant who is always seen wielding a morning star, which is a kind of weapon that has a spiked piece of metal attached to its handle. It's pretty interesting, and we know that it was a hero because it was in the heroes page in the Art of SuperCell book. I don't think they would accidentally think that was some kind of hero. As cool as it looks, that's all we know about it, just some pictures. It's very possible that this was scrapped sometime in 2012 or early 2013. Elixir Monster. This one has a pretty well-known story, and yes, if you're wondering, this is basically the same as the Elixir Goblin in Clash Royale. So this one starts during the development of Town Hall 12. They were prototyping many troops for it, and one of those concepts was an Elixir Monster that was basically a golem that, when defeated, was split into more and more smaller versions of itself. I found it pretty hilarious that what they did to get a playable prototype in the game was have a golem split into a bunch of tiny hog riders. Of course, it was very OP. Stats for this were found long ago as well, including the stats for the secondary golem when it split up. But just keep in mind that it was never finished, and these numbers were certainly a work in progress. But the Elixir Monster seems to have gone through different iterations, because the Elixir Monster was also known as a reverse golem, because in one of its versions it would grow bigger instead of splitting into smaller blobs. Specifically, it would gain strength and size as it destroyed things, and it dropped a rage after it was killed. However, it was scrapped because it was a very complex troop, and developers were worried that the average player wouldn't know how to use them effectively. They did revisit this idea for the release of Town Hall 13, but that didn't go anywhere, and it eventually ended up in Clash Royale as the version where it kept splitting up. Immortality Spell. We don't actually know anything about this spell other than three important things. It was being developed in 2018, it was called Immortality Spell, and it was scrapped because it was too OP. This was talked about during an interview with a community manager at the time, and I really wish he would have elaborated more, but I'm going to assume that the spell probably gave troops or even heroes an extended life. So instead of a group of troops or one single troop dying at 0 HP, they'd stick around with some kind of immunity for a few seconds. It's very possible that the idea inspired the revive spell, which was 6 years later, but mechanically, it was pretty different. Executioner. That most likely wasn't its name, but it was supposed to be a troop similar to the Executioner from Clash Royale. Interestingly, it also had 2 modes like the Druid, and we have some real numbers for both of them. So the first mode was ranged, and I assume it threw its weapon like a boomerang. That's what it does in Clash Royale anyway. And based on the numbers, it was a mini tank. It's kind of like if a Valkyrie and a bowler had children. Actually, don't think about that. And at some point, it would go into a melee mode, at which point it would hit and move way faster. Unfortunately, it's unclear what exactly the troop was going to target or what kind of damage it was dealing, but if it was anything like the Executioner, it was likely dealing area damage and then maybe switch to single target in melee mode. Goblin Glider. Yet another troop that was supposed to be released with Tunnel 12. Yeah, they weren't lying when they said they tried a lot of them. The Goblin Glider was basically a goblin that flew in on these little gliders and dropped down to attack resource storages and collectors. At some point, developers said it also dropped down to target defenses and then resources after. I'm not really sure which one's correct, but that's besides the point. They probably tried 2 versions. It was scrapped because it was too spammy, and they felt that it didn't add anything to the game. What kind of pointless troop is this, guys? We can actually see what exactly it looked like. There's one crashed into a bush in the summer scenery, which pretty much looks like all of the fan concepts for it. Eventually, this idea did inspire the Hog Glider in the builder base a year later. Sneaky Barbarian. In 2017, a mysterious troop was found in the game files called Proto-Sneaky Barb. This was a prototype for a sneaky barbarian. We don't know what it looked like. You know, barbarian was probably a placeholder, just a base for it, and we don't know what it did either. However, one interesting find was that in its description, it said Halloween ghosts, and it had mentions of ghosts info. Now, it's important to note that the royal ghost from Clash Royale did not exist yet. So this wasn't just one of those, hey, let's add a Clash Royale troop for Halloween situation. No, this wasn't even a thing. Now, this is just pure speculation, hear me out, but I believe what could have happened is that the Sneaky Barbarian didn't work out, so they instead added the Pumpkin Barbarian. Maybe they ran out of time or something. And the Clash Royale team was like, hey, this troop ain't so bad. And it became the Royal Ghost. That's my theory, at least. Scrapped pets. Yeah, this next one isn't a specific troop, but I wanted to show you all the cool pets that we could have got. Like the Pet Rock, Flightless Dragon, Potion Pig, Battle Pig. They look absolutely nothing like any of the pets we have, and it's interesting seeing some of them with spells. They possibly buffed the heroes instead of being a utility. The Potion Pig even has a basket of spells. I wonder if he dropped many of them or something. And there's more. The Cave Bear, Hedgehog, Rhino, Squid Facehugger, Bloodhound, Hatchling. If you look closely, these concepts say what they did too. Some of them sound familiar, while others are unique, like the Hatchling where it was a walking egg that hatched into this tiny lightning dragon, or the Bloodhound that transformed into a crazier beast version of itself, or at least that's what it looks like. And finally, these concepts for a bunny and a chicken. Pretty interesting stuff. Flare Spell. Yet another spell that was tested at some point but didn't make the cut. The flare spell was basically a flare that you threw anywhere, and troops would go to it. It was very likely inspired by the Boom Beach flare that does exactly that, and the idea behind it was having more control over your army. However, it was too complex and also went against the core gameplay. You're not supposed to control your army? Like, what are you talking about? At least not back then. So instead, they added a spell that would tell your troops where not to go. The invisibility. So yes, the flare spell was scrapped, but in some way it made it in, inspired another spell. A spell that actually is useful and fits better into the game. Mobile Mortar Squad. So this concept comes from this, which is a sheet full of a bunch of random sketches made by the artists from the Clash team. At first glance, it may seem like some random sketches that never made it that far, but if you look closely, there are some early versions of troops that you might recognize, like the Firecracker and the Battle Ram. Anyways, the Mobile Mortar Squad consisted of 3 characters: the Commander, Rookie, and Demo. It seemed like they were supposed to push this mortar on wheels, and it probably turned into melee characters when the mortar was destroyed, or maybe one of them was blasted into the air in classic Clash Royale style. There's also another concept that looks similar to this, but with skeletons Hogs and a dead Goblin, if I'm seeing that correctly. That's pretty dark, especially how they put a bomb in his mouth. The disrespect. Anyway, we never heard or saw of this troop again. Cut Mashup Troops. And finally, I wanted to look at some cool Mashup Troops that never made the cut, like this Electro Dragon Healer, Valkyrie Hog, Dragon Bomber, Dragon Balloon, Bat Hog Glider, I don't even know what you would call that, Valkyrie Witch, Hog Bowler, Barbarian Healer, Yeti Witch, Lava Hound Yeti, and this wizard that I don't really know what it's supposed to be. And there's more! I've personally never seen these before, I've seen the others, but we can see a Minkari, Firehogs, Pokian. They made a lot of troops for this event. I mean, it's crazy how much there were, and there were some very cool ones as well. These were supposed to be released for the 2023 Mashup Madness event, but only 4 got selected, which were none of these, by the way. These are all the scrapped ones. But yeah, that is every kill troop that we know of. There were certainly more I considered added into the list, and there's more that we don't know of, but they either didn't have enough information or they were very close to what we already have. Anyway, with that said, hope you all enjoyed, but hey, before you go, YouTube thinks you'll like this next video, so why don't you check it out? As always, see you guys in the next one. Peace!